Great. Well, I'm Dave Almack again, the U.S. Director for CLC, and I'm here with
Jamie Phillips. I'm the Director of Global Sales for B&H Publishing Group, a division of Lifeway.
And let me just start by saying how grateful we are that we had Lifeway here with us for our conference. And Jamie made a presentation today which was just excellent. And I just thought if we could start our time talking a little bit about the presentation. And you had several key points that you made, but you talked specifically about this idea, if I were starting a publishing company from scratch, what would I do? And give me just one or two of the bullet points that you talked about today at a real high level.
Sure.
That we can remember as we go back from the conference.
Sure. Challenging question. Something we're faced with redefining even in a mature industry in the U.S. But really it boils down to four key principles. Content is king. That really is the core of publishing, and it remains that for the near-term future, we believe. Content has to be exceptional. Two is distribution needs to be broad. You need to be able to distribute that content widely around the world. Three is that the landscape is changing. That technology is really causing a great upheaval in the traditional publishing world. So we have to find ways to leverage technology. And then the fourth thing really is people. People are the ones who do the work of content, of distribution, and of technology. So we have to invest in people solutions.
One of the first things you started out with, and you said it's sort of the number one overarching principle, was this idea that we were looking at publishing and understanding our calling. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that idea of understanding our calling, and maybe as it relates to even CLC.
Yeah, absolutely. Within those four key principles that I mentioned earlier, all of that ties back to an organization's calling, and we share in that calling. We're both interested in advancing the gospel, so it's a close association between our two companies in that regard. But the calling is important because God's given us a unique vision. And the role that we play is different from the role that CLC plays. It's different from the role that other Christian organizations play. And I think that's part of God's grand plan, is that we each have our role to play. And so we have to be attuned to what that vision He's given us is. And one of the ways that we can test that is to look at the natural gifts, the strengths, the abilities, the giftedness that He's blessed our organizations with. And those vary. Those are different. But when we can identify our strengths and our gifts, along with the vision that He's given us, and put those things together, that really defines for us what our calling is. And then we have a goal to pursue with content and distribution and technology and personnel.
So understanding that it's so critical that we know what our calling is, and understanding that we really understand then what our gifting is as it relates to that calling, I think it's really important for us as CLC to really evaluate that and say, what in fact is it that's unique or special or different about CLC? And you actually identified 2 or 3 things that you thought were specifically unique about CLC, maybe even strengths of our ministry. And I'd like to see if you could just articulate a couple of those for me again, for those who are watching this video for the first time.
Absolutely. The things that we love about CLC, that we can identify as absolute strengths for you guys, would be things like your multinational operation. The number of countries that you operate in absolutely dwarfs what Lifeway does. And Lifeway is a big organization.
Hope everybody heard that watching this video.
But we really are a U.S.-based company.
Yeah.
Now, we distribute product outside of the U.S., but to actually have operations in country, in as many countries as you do, that is a clear strength. You have expertise in local cultural norms that we don't have and that many other organizations around the world don't have. The nature of having people on the ground in those countries where you can develop an expertise with the culture and the language and the identity of the people that you serve, that's a vast advantage over many other organizations that are out there. So, the multinational piece, the multi-language piece, and the multicultural piece are 3 things that are unique strengths to CLC.
I think one other thing we talked about is that we really focus on a multi-denominational approach too, which is also interesting. But coming out of that, I'd like to end or talk about one last piece of this, and that is the idea of us doing now ebooks, which we've been talking a lot about, in multi-language situations, and how someone in a local culture can adapt a book that might do well in one culture, but they can really do something with that in a local culture. How CLC can even fit into that from an ebook standpoint, and what you would advise us as we see that developing.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have noticed as Lifeway is that for the better part of 100 years, we have really been the steward of U.S.-based messages. And we've distributed those broadly. But as Christianity grows around the world, particularly in the South and in the East, we're finding that there are new voices rising up that have a God-given message, not just for their local environment, but potentially for the world.
Absolutely.
Much as we have exported messages from the U.S. Into other world territories, what we're finding is that now we can be the recipients of those messages, that there are strong Christian, Bible-based principles being taught in local cultures around the world that are just as meaningful and just as deep and valuable for the body of Christ, for the church at large. So there's tons of opportunity there, and it's an exciting day to see how God's going to move those messages around the world.
So if I hear you saying this correctly, who knows, maybe the next Max Lucado will come from South America, and the next Billy Graham might come from China.
Absolutely.
You never know.
Absolutely.
And see how God will move in the years to come. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate that all you've shared with us today, and hopefully God will use that in our ministry to help us grow as we seek to make evangelical Christian literature available to all nations. So thanks so much.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure, Dave.